today to talk to Justice Diallo. Last week, if you could remember, the Constitutional Review Commission of the Gambia that was established by the government of President Adama Barrow as part of their um, um, uh, um, transitional justice process actually made a big announcement and revelation. I remember when I interviewed Justice Diallo, one of the questions I put to him was whether the constitution will not be finished and spend several months on the desk of the president while Gambians wait for that. And his response was, no, it's not going to happen like that, that they are going to be published in tandem as they submit it to the office of the president. Well, indeed, we did not have to wait, and Gambians last week were caught by this news, and I'm glad to welcome Justice Diallo again so that we can take up the conversation from where we start. Good afternoon, Mr. Diallo.
Good afternoon, Osman. Good to be with you again.
Congratulations to you and your team for a job well done.
Thank you very much.
You did fulfill your promise, right?
Well, we are constrained by law. Obviously, we had to act pursuant to the law. So I'm glad we are getting there, even though this is just the first stage in terms of publishing a draft and getting public feedback on it before we finalize the draft in order to submit that to His Excellency, the President of the Republic.
Okay. So if I understand you well, you just published the draft for the general public, but not submitted to the president yet, right?
That is correct. Remember, as part of our action plan, that since we have consulted with the public in terms of determining what their wishes and aspirations are, it's only important and it's only right that we go back to the public and show them what we have published and seek their opinion on that before we move on to the next stage of finalizing the draft and submitting it eventually to the President.
Okay. A lot of people were concerned, were actually concerned for what happened after young took over and became civilian group. They, of course, had a constitutional review commissions. Thereof, we did work at the time, and from what we've seen, what the government, what came out, and people were hoping that the same thing was going to happen. It would happen whenever you submit your draft to President Adama Barrow's government, and then they end up making changes to it or taking out some of the things that were excited that we never to the Gambians, and he said it from the political perspective of clauses that have to do with the political situation.
Well, Pasman, I mean, I think the public, the public fear in that particular regard is understandable, and it's something that had happened in the past, and it's something that people have a legitimate interest to be concerned about. From our standpoint as the Constitutional Review Commission, what I can speak to is the fact that we have been given a mandate, and that mandate terminates at some point. And that is when we submit the draft Constitution of the Republic of the Gambia. Beyond that, obviously, it becomes a different process. It goes to the President. It's for the President to then forward that along with a bill to the National Assembly and eventually to a referendum. We can only hope that the National Assembly, acting on its own wisdom and seeing the need to enact legislation to enable the establishment of the Constitutional Review Commission that will review the current Constitution and develop a new one. And in addition to that, the President himself. You want me to continue?
Yes, you can continue now. Yes, yes, you can repeat what you were saying. I asked you a question and said,
Yes.
a lot of people were concerned with what happened with the July 22nd, or as particularly when the Gambia became a civilian rule and they set up their own constitutional review commission. And what ended up happening, from what we are told, is that the draft was submitted. What was submitted and what came out to the public's eye was definitely different. So how would you react to that fear from the public?
Yeah, like I said before, I think the public has a legitimate concern, and that concern hopefully is being heard by all those that are concerned. And one will be mindful not to repeat the mistakes of the past. And if you look at the process that the CRC has engaged, it's very open, it's very transparent, and is designed principally to ensure that ultimately Gambians express their wishes and aspirations in terms of what they want to see in the Constitution. And when that is developed, they then have the opportunity to take ownership of the new Constitution. And that can't happen in the absence of participatory democracy, in the absence of an inclusive process, whereby the people themselves can meet and discuss, the sort of things that they want to see in the new Constitution. I think that so far, everybody who has been involved in the constitutional review process from inception, from the National Assembly to the executive, that is the president, to the establishment of the commission itself. Everybody has really been, in my own considered view, been very positive, and in terms of ensuring that ultimately we have a constitution that everybody can accept and see as representative of the views and aspirations of our compatriots. So going forward, my hope and certainly my prayer on behalf of the people is that considering the process that we have embarked upon and leading to the next stage where we contact the public to expect or receive their feedback. Once we translate that into the final draft and finalize that product, our hope is that it will not be interfered with. But again, like I said, our mandate is just to produce the document, that's the new constitution, and hand it over to the executive. And beyond that, it's a different process that kicks in. And I'm sure Gambians will be attuned to these developments and follow the processes in order to establish for themselves whether anything has been taken out or not. I can assure you that so far all indications in my interactions with people in government is that there is no intention to interfere with the draft constitution. But obviously, we don't know exactly what's going to happen. But Gambians have a legitimate concern here. We all can just remain optimistic for now that everything will work out, as the public wants it to happen.
Okay. So the final draft is what you will end up publishing or handing over to the president and the government, right? Now the first draft is shared with the public to scrutinize and give feedback. So how many more drafts do we have, or how many more stages do we have before it gets to the president's desk?
Well, this is the only stage. I mean, the first draft that is being proposed and which is now published and that is designed not only for public consumption, but in order to receive feedback from the public in terms of their views on the provisions of the draft constitution. Once we receive that feedback, we will sit once again and look at those opinions, just like we did in terms of the first draft, and see what needs to be changed in the constitution, or what needs to be improved, or what needs to be taken out, and then once we finalize that draft of the new constitution, we will also finalize the draft report, and the two documents are the ones that will be submitted directly to the president. The law requires that as soon as we submit that to the president, we could also publish it. So that's the legal process in place at the moment, and that is the process that we are working towards.
So how much longer do you have before you actually publish that and put it on the president's desk? Like this public scrutiny, this one that you've published, how much longer do Gambians have to wait?
We are giving 1 month for Gambians to review the draft constitution that has been published and share with us their opinions on that draft. Then we are hopeful that shortly after that we will take a couple of days, maybe a few weeks, hopefully not, to finalize the draft by looking at the opinions that are being expressed. We are currently following everything that is ongoing in terms of the public sharing opinions, whether it's on social media, the print media, or whatever medium that people have been using. And we have a team in our communications department, indeed amongst our staff, who are actually following these processes. So our hope is that as we proceed to the finishing line on this assignment, everything that is being said is being compiled, and we will sit after the end of the consultation period to review those opinions, and then seek to finalize the draft document. In terms of exactly when the public can expect the final draft, I think it will be kind of premature for me to state that at this point. I don't want to be roasted on my own promises for that for some genuine reason we may not be able to keep.
So you have promised in the past on my show, and you've delivered to expectation. So even if you were to give a promise, I would very much believe that you will deliver. But then I'm glad you mentioned the public scrutiny and the concerns that are going on social media. One big one throughout these days is supposedly, and I'm saying supposedly because some people believe it was there and it was removed. Some people are arguing that it was never in any of our constitutions. It's the issue of the Gambia being a secular state, the secularism. What happened to that? The debate is very tough. People are alluding back to former President Yahya Jammeh and the way he declared the Gambia an Islamic state and everything. And non-Muslims actually, for the most part, are concerned, as well as Muslims are concerned about not putting that word secular. The Gambia is a sovereign, secular state. Some say it was in the previous constitution, say it is not. What can Justice General tell us about this?
I mean, Postman, you are right. I mean, the debate has been quite brisk on this particular subject matter. But I would want to put this in its proper perspective. I think it is important that the public understands that we have considered all the submissions that have been canvassed with us, whether in writing or through public consultation processes. But ultimately, what is important is for us to look at the subject matter in a very objective and comprehensive manner. If you look at the constitutional history of the Gambia, dating back even before independence, with the constitutional order of the Gambia of 1965, going on to the Republican Constitution of 1970, and then culminating in the current Constitution of 1997, there is absolutely no reference to the Gambia being a secular sovereign republic. That would have been for the 1970. Prior to that, obviously, there was no reference to anything of the Gambia being a sovereign republic in any case. But the point I want to make is this. If you look at the 1970 Constitution, in Section 1, he made specific provision that the Gambia is a sovereign republic. That's the language he used. In 1997, the Constitution that was published used the same thing in Section 1 and states that the Gambia is a sovereign republic. In 2001, an attempt was made whereby that section, amongst other sections of the Constitution, was amended to insert the word secular before sovereign state. Now, that was challenged by somebody called Kemes and Jame. If if the Gambians are following this properly, and the literature is out there, it's public, is the case of Kemes and Jame versus the Attorney General. And the subject matter simply was that Section 1 of the current Constitution is an entrenched clause. And by that, what I mean is that there is a process within the Constitution. If you want to amend an entrenched clause, you must follow such a process. And what that process entails is that you have the amendment enacted by the National Assembly, and thereafter it has to be submitted to the National Assembly. Kemes and Jame challenged the amendment before the Supreme Court of this country, which is our final court of appeal, on the basis that that amendment was unconstitutional. And the Supreme Court agreed that the amendment was indeed unconstitutional because it had not gone through a referendum. So in other words, the process to complete the amendment was never followed through. So effectively, that provision, which included the word secular, was never constitutionally part of the Constitution of 1997. And I've seen people, place the two documents, the draft Constitution and the existing Constitution side by side, to say, okay, this word secular was there, but you removed it. We did not remove anything. Constitutionally, nothing was removed because it did not exist. The word secular constitutional did not exist because the Supreme Court declared that attempted amendment to be unconstitutional. Now, if you look at the Constitution of 1997, that has been printed. The word secular is there. And one wonders why the word remained in that draft Constitution. In 2009, a revision of the laws was undertaken, including a revision of the draft of the existing Constitution. And that word, for some strange reason, was left in there with a footnote at the bottom that only lawyers probably would understand what it meant. And in any law revision, what you do is you update the law, you take into account amendments, you take into account judicial decisions, and make sure that what is reproduced or what is revised is in fact the law at the material time. So that word secular should have been taken out. It should never have been printed, but that wasn't done. But that does not detract from the fact that constitutionally the word secular has never been part of any of the constitutions of this country. Having said that, I think it's also important that we look at the variables in terms of the various opinions that we have received. We have received a lot of opinions on this particular subject matter, a lot of recommendations, and we looked at it and looked at the totality of the provisions. Now, what makes a country a secular state is not a mere statement that it is secular. What in fact makes a country a secular state is what the provisions of the Constitution provides. Because you could declare yourself to be a secular state, but the provisions of the Constitution actually abrogate that secularism. So ultimately, I think what people need to look at, and this is what we urge the public to do, is to look at the totality of the Constitution rather than just concentrate on one provision, because then that tends to that tends to short circuit the process in terms of limiting your ability to look at other subjects in a very objective manner. There is this clause which is in the draft Constitution, that's clause 151. And I haven't seen many people in this debate making reference to that. And I would have thought that is the provision that in fact, is relevant, is the most significant in this whole debate. And that provision does three things, but I'll mention two which are pertinent to this subject matter. The first is that it prohibits the National Assembly from passing a bill or any legislation to declare the Gambia a one-party state. So that is prohibited. The next thing it does is it prohibits the National Assembly from passing any legislation to declare any religion or to establish any religion as state religion. So all the religions in this country are treated equally. What I have found most unfortunate in this whole debate is that, whilst we are giving the people the opportunity and the platform to, exchange opinion on this, this is taking on a religious dimension, and it ought not to, because, we as the CRC.
In fact, not cutting you short,
yes.
What people are saying, just with the word secular, some people are misunderstanding it to actually mean Islam or favor Islam or declare Gambia an Islamic state, or the Islamic Republic of the Gambia or whatever it is. Can you clarify that for the people, for the common masses?
You know, the word secular, if you look at it from its historical origin, it's a very complex terminology and is the most misunderstood and misinterpreted word in history. And there hasn't been any agreed school of thought as to what it actually means. There are different schools of thought on this. And if you look at it in greater perspective, and we've done a lot of research, and we have we have a number of brilliant researchers who have looked into this, and we ourselves have researched into it. The word secular is interpreted differently. There are those who interpret it to mean a distinction between state and religion. There are those who believe that it's a definition that actually means the state, a state without religion. If you use the word, that means it's a state without religion. There is that school of thought. And there is the atheist angle to this debate, which is that religion does not belong anywhere in the affairs of any country. If you look at all of those things, if you use that word, anybody can use any of those to interpret the Constitution. Take the Constitution of the United States, for instance, and perhaps you will know something about this. It is described as a secular constitution, perhaps the primary secular constitution of the world. But the word secular is not used. So that's why I'm saying one needs to look at the entire provisions of the draft constitution to be in a position to determine whether this actually is tilted towards one religion as against the other, which it is not, in our view. And it certainly saddens me even, to see some comments being made about the sole Christian member of our commission, accusing him of things that are not appropriate. Because, Commissioner Dr. Melville George has been one of the most fantastic commissioners we've had. And he's worked tirelessly. Even when he's abroad and receiving medical treatment, he still participates in the work of the commission. So, like I said, it saddens me to see him being unfairly targeted in this and being criticized and vilified, which I think is totally uncalled for, totally inappropriate. But that aside, we understand the public debate around this subject matter. My personal advice to people is that you don't have to convince yourself to be convinced about what I say. You just have to be convinced about your own particular, own personal view. Whether you accept what I said or not is immaterial. The fact of the matter is, when we publish the document, we have ruled it out to invite public comment on it. And the public comment in specific terms means submit your ideas, submit your views to us. I think it is a very dangerous exercise, and those who are doing this, in my considered view, need to desist. This is not about religion. This is not about Islam or Christianity, or Christianity versus Islam or Islam versus Christianity. This has nothing to do with that. We've had the 1970 Constitution, we have the 1997 Constitution, and we will always live harmoniously together, as a community of Gambians, never based on religious lines. So all of a sudden, the debate is being sparked along the lines of religious belief. And I think people need to, and whilst I respect public opinion and I respect people for their opinion, I think we need to be a little more responsible than that. Expressing opinions and taking platforms and misleading other people on this particular subject to the point of making it a religious issue is really most unfortunate. And I think as responsible citizens, we owe it to ourselves and to the future generations of our country to continue to live harmoniously together and not to fan religious tensions or things that could actually lead to that, and the consequences of which nobody knows how it will look. I think we just need to be responsible as citizens. That's the most I think I need to say on this part.
Well, about the fact that people turn and will just be comfortable seeing it in there. They want to see it in their circle, underline, and boldly written in color.
Yes, people have. Yeah.
Give peace of mind. Some people say it's money, and whatever. Some people say that
Pat. Yeah.
No other future president can tamper with it. They fear that without that word, it can be tampered with by another president. Your reaction?
We can say that about almost every provision. We can say that about almost every provision of the Constitution, that we can make it clearer by using certain words. But this has to do more than that. There are drafting techniques involving. There are issues of legislative drafting and ensuring that we do things in a proper manner. And in one of the fundamental principles of drafting, you don't state the obvious, because it is redundant. And if you look at that section that I referred to, section 151, along with the section in the draft constitution dealing with freedom of conscience, which says that every person has a right to manifest his or her belief in any form or manner. There is that freedom, and and that's another angle that the people seem to be missing. That's why I say people need to read the entire Constitution. So it's not a question about making qualifications here and there. Where it is obvious, we really don't need to do that. But like I said, this is a consultation phase. People may hold different opinions, and we still invite them to put something in writing. I just would, like I said, plead that we act more responsibly by not fanning a religious tension over this. I think we owe it to ourselves to engage in a decent debate without necessarily vilifying each other. Ultimately, we all have the same aim here, which is to come up with a final product that we all can call ours and take ownership of.
Well, thank you very much. You are listening to me. So, maybe if you are independent team about my system, QC, just to be on the let's talk about the politics, the issue of the secularism of the country. Your commission, political process, or the things that have to do with all that, people say you have given what people do then. First, talking about having simultaneous voting for both the presidential and the parliamentary election. How popular was this particular subject matter amongst Gambians, both home and the diaspora?
It was quite popular, if I may say so. And remember, the vast opinions that are reflected in the Constitution actually reflect those of the general public. And there was overwhelming view that to avoid voter apathy and also to ensure that people come out and vote in their massive numbers. Those two elections need to be held simultaneously, and that is precisely what we have provided. And we've consulted. We've also consulted with the people responsible for elections in this particular manner, and they think it is doable, it is practical, and we do not see any issue with that.
Okay, in fact, I want to take you back a little bit. Tell us how you guys got to determine what made it into the constitution, like into the draft. what measures did you use, or what yardstick, or what mechanisms did you guys qualify what gets in there based on the opinions you had? Did it have to be 90%, 80%, 60%? How did you determine really what made it into the draft?
What we have done, obviously, we have used different platforms, I think totaling 10 different platforms of consultation. We've engaged, for instance, in the face-to-face dialogue with the public, both internally, externally, and we've also had focus group discussions where we had different interest groups meeting with commissioners and staff of the commission and expressing their opinions, and all of these being recorded. We've also had household surveys where we mapped out the entire country and conducted that survey along the length and breadth of this country. We've had online surveys. We've had people respond in writing directly to the CRC issues document, and we also have people responding through social media and so on and so forth. So we use different platforms. And we have a group of statisticians who have collated all of this information and then looked at the qualitative and the quantitative aspects of the opinions and made their analysis. It is on that basis that they came up with the relevant parameters. We choose the percentage opinion on a particular subject matter and where they varied, what the variation is, and so on and so forth. So there is a clear methodology that we have established and used. But that is just one aspect of it. We obviously, as a country, are members to particular international treaties and under which we have treaty obligations. So we have to consider those as well. In addition to that, we have considered and done a lot of research to establish what constitutes international best practice in a lot of these areas. And the final point we have considered is a provision in the CRC Act which requires that we take into account national values and ethos, because those are important elements in this whole exercise. So we've used different platforms, and we all have our individual notes throughout these consultation processes to cross-check some of the information that was presented to us. So I think generally we've practically exhausted every possible means to ensure that public opinion was captured properly, and that the quantitative numbers are properly recorded, and the qualitative analysis was carried out. And all of these, at the end of the day, help us to determine exactly what constituted public opinion. There are those areas where there wasn't any large majority, so it was difficult to make that determination, and we used our judgment, in order to ensure that we properly represented what we thought would be in the best interest of this country. But again, it's out there, and the public can tell us whether we got it right or we got it wrong. And where they think we got it wrong, they can tell us how we can get it right. That's what constructive debate, constructive criticism is all about. I think in this entire process, we have tried not only to engage the public, but we have tried to be as transparent as possible, because this is a national document. This is one that will govern us, it will govern our future generations, and it's one to be taken very seriously, complex as the process may be.
Okay. Diaspora voting is big
I think that question, it's a relevant question, but I think it is one that should be addressed to a different body responsible for the conduct of elections. If you look at the current constitution, there is provision. So in the current laws, there is provision whereby the diaspora should be facilitated to exercise their franchise. There is specific provision in the current draft of the constitution for something along those lines also to happen. And it will be one of our recommendations, certainly, to ensure that the diaspora are empowered. And I've seen instances where that provision again has been misquoted. But again, I just urge our citizens and other stakeholders to read the entire document. I think you get a better appreciation of the provisions of the document when you look at it in its entirety. But yes, the diaspora are part of this process. They are citizens, and we haven't made any distinction between Gambians living abroad and Gambians living at home. Once you're a Gambian, you're a Gambian. The right of exercise of the franchise applies and is to be exercised by every Gambian.
Well, I know I have interviewed you and we talked about this when you were in Seattle. You were widely criticized for actually coming out to the diaspora for your consultation, and you did shed light on that at the time, but not everybody wanted. I saw a couple of people after the draft came out, and people endorsed it and said every dime spent on the consultation and the CRC is well worth it, including the diaspora. Some people still believe it was really, they call it gibberish or whatever, but it wasn't necessary, that you could not just consult it online. You guys just wanted to travel and receive big volumes. So what is your reaction to both people who still believe that you wasted taxpayer dollars to come to the diaspora, as well as people who believe that, well, it was well worth it? And how did you feel actually now seeing the public reaction to what you're doing?
People are entitled to their opinions. That's not something you debate. But quite clearly, I think the reactions we are seeing so far, particularly from the diaspora, is that it was worth the exercise, because it is the totality of the interventions of every Gambian, home and abroad, that has enabled us to shape what really constitutes the wishes and aspirations of Gambians, which we eventually put into the Constitution. So it's for the Gambians to make that determination for themselves. But whatever we did not act contrary to the law. Whatever we did in accordance and in consonance with our terms of reference as provided to us. And we ensured that we created that platform, that avenue, that audience, to make sure that every Gambian has that opportunity to interface with the Constitutional Review Commission. It is important for us to understand that in a consultative process like this, obviously people can be critical, and they are welcome to do that, but obviously we need to be focused and make sure that ultimately what we are doing, we are conscientiously guided by the law, and that we have that good conscience that we are doing what is right. None of us went on this trip to make money. Actually, we lost, if anything is to be considered. I've even seen pundits put on the media calculating how much we each received, how much money we wasted, and things like that. And it's this kind of speculation, not based on any factual things, that really inflame unnecessary circumstances. But the reality is we acted in accordance with the law, and even those who are talking about having a platform online, trust me, Pausman, how many Gambians really have that access, that opportunity to do this online? And that is one thing. The other thing is, how many people would have turned up to have an online dialogue with the CRC? I think we have seen the difference. We have seen the difference in the various countries that we have visited, the large turnout and the public engagement. You could never have had that in an online fashion, particularly in circumstances where telecommunications networks are not the most perfect. So there are all of these elements concerned. And who would travel, for instance, miles and miles and miles to come and sit before a screen to talk to people here in the Gambia on such issues. I mean, not that it wouldn't happen, but if you look at it, if you look at the totality of it, we need to be realistic as citizens. There are those who are not tech savvy, and we do not need to leave them out of this process. And we took the conscious decision that we were going to include every Gambian. Take, for instance, we visited France. We had a lot of Gambians that turned up who couldn't really speak the English language, you couldn't understand it. But they found that direct engagement so helpful, you know. And this is the process we've been through practically in every location that we've been to. I think we need to, sometimes we need to think outside of ourselves and think that the ability, the facility, and the opportunity that we have is what everybody else has. I think sometimes we make that mistake of measuring events on the basis of us, you know, instead of on the basis of everybody. These are important elements that we need to consider. Obviously, people are entitled to their opinion, but if you ask me very honestly, I have found, and my commissioners equally have found, this public engagement with the diaspora extremely helpful, and we are glad that we undertook that assignment.
So how do you feel now? I mean, as this, how do you feel now hearing a reverse position from a good number of people in the diaspora who thought yes, it was a waste of public resources? Now that you say yes, you've seen a lot of positive reaction, how does that feel?
Well, it's too early to say. I mean, and I think it's not so much how I feel. I think both myself and the commissioners of the CRC, the position we've always taken is not about you know, what will glorify us or what will make us happy. It's about the people, because otherwise we would not have consulted in the first place. It's what makes people happy. If people are happy about the product itself, then we are satisfied. And we can, you know, we can take solace from that reality. But ultimately, we also recognize that this is not a simple, straightforward process. It is a process in which, you know, there will be those who will be critical, those who will be very positive. But overall, at least so far, what we are seeing is a positive review of the draft constitution, and we want people to continue to look at the document and not to shy away from being, you know, constructively critical of the document if they want to. I mean, you know, that's what we are made of as the CRC, and you know, we have to develop the ability, and believe we've done that thus far, to look at things, no matter how critical they may be, in a very objective fashion, in order to evaluate, you know, a positive position for the good of the draft constitution and for our country.
Okay, one more question on that is how did the politicians actually react to this issue of the diaspora, coming to the diaspora? We know you contracted with different political parties in the country.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and they all have a stake in the diaspora voting and stuff. Some are bigger than others, some may have bigger or larger followers than others. So when you consulted with them, what was the opinions of the politicians? Did they think that Gambians in the diaspora should vote, or I mean those with less hope thought, no, it should not happen? What was the general feeling of the politicians? Was it unanimous? Did all of them agree, or did the diaspora should be franchised, or some believe it should be disenfranchised?
I think generally, I mean, there is no, I do not find any distinction here in terms of opinion between politicians and non-politicians. This is one area where there has been almost 100% opinion expressed that diaspora Gambians should be given the franchise, and they need to exercise that franchise. So there is total unanimity practically on this. Obviously, we've had a very minority opinion that if diasporans want to vote, then you almost travel to the Gambian vote. But like I said, that's in the very tiny minority. But otherwise, Gambians generally, including the politicians, were of the opinion that the diaspora Gambians should be permitted to vote.
Okay, some were very concerned because we have diaspora who actually wanted to contest in the mayoral election, National Assembly elections, and the amount of time that they spend in the Gambia or that they should live in the Gambia actually barred them from, and now we've seen some of those adjustments. Was that also a unanimous consensus or something? Because some people were disqualified from participating in the local government elections and other elections actually.
I think those laws remain in force at least until the new constitution takes effect. What the draft provides, and I've seen a few misrepresentations on this. We've consulted widely both at home and abroad. The general consensus was that if you want to contest the office of president, you need to be ordinarily resident in the Gambia for a period of at least 3 years. There was general consensus on that. And I will urge people to look at the definition of ordinary resident in the draft as well, because we tried to make that clear as well instead of leaving it to legal or judicial interpretation. In addition to that, the residency requirement under the current constitution is 5 years. We have reduced that to 3 years because there was general consensus basically that 5 years was too long. And also we made provision that if you are a dual national, that means you hold the citizenship of the Gambia and the citizenship of another country, you should not contest the presidency. There was general opinion on this, even in the diaspora. But even, within the diaspora, we've had also opinion that people should be allowed to contest. If they win, before they assume office, they can renounce their foreign citizenship. But this wasn't generally, from the information we've gathered, it did not really gain the traction that it needed to be included in the Constitution. So that is the restriction there. And for the position of vice president, whatever restriction is there, whatever qualification or disqualification is outlined, it applies to the holder of that office as well. But for National Assembly elections, we've removed the 1 year residency requirement. So if you want to run Pausman in the next general election, you can wait until 2 or 3 months and come and run. You just have to contend with people saying you're Ganga or Dogan, and things like that. That's something, that's a decision you take on your own. But that restriction has been removed.
The accountability for political parties, for them to declare their assets as well as that of the president. A lot of people seem to see that to be quite soothing, especially for that of the president when he has to declare his stuff before his term or at the beginning and at the end of his term. A lot of people commend the commission for putting that in there. Were these also very popular among Gambians?
I think these were not only popular, they were practically unanimous. I think, and again, there is absolutely no targeting in terms of the drafting of our Constitution. The overwhelming opinion of Gambians generally has to do with the issue of governance. In fact, the majority of opinions and majority of concerns that we have received during our public consultation centered on the issues of governance. And that has to do with, propriety in government, good behavior in government, and things like that. And the question is, how do we deal with that? And we dealt with that in the draft constitution in different forms. And one of them is to ensure that if you are assuming an important office, whether it's elective or otherwise, you need to declare your assets. And when you demit office, you need to declare your assets, the assets that you've acquired since you took up appointment. These are important in the interest of transparency and good governance in any context. So I hope people see it in that light. And they have general application as well. Civil servants are required to do that even under the current constitution. So this is of general application, and it's just designed to ensure transparency, good government, and good behavior in government, because everybody holding a key position in government is actually holding that position in the form of an entrustment from the people. People have generally indirectly entrusted you with that position, and the idea is that you must function in that office for and on behalf of the people. and that requires, a good degree of transparency, a good degree of good behavior, in order to ensure you charge that responsibility and that you are not in any way short-circuiting the public interest.
Well, that is one part, and I think you are very right. Don't you think this partly takes care of this issue of system change that our politicians are well spewing a lot these days? Honorable Ali Fasala mentioned it when he was in Chatham House sometimes in 2017. Lawyer Zenu Dabo said it in a rally in Bakau. Honorable Maifati just mentioned it when he returned from Germany the other day, that there is no system change in the country. So setting up these apparatus will definitely help to bring about that system change that is currently being skewed or propelled or championed by our politicians, and it is just towards holding them accountable. I think that is good. One thing you mentioned just a while ago is that this is not targeting anybody. It's not, when I asked you about the politicians, the political parties, and holding them accountable for their funding and stuff, you said it's not targeting anybody. But there's one thing that targets President Barrow, which is the issue of term limit. We are all happy, everybody is happy. A lot of people, the majority, I would say, are happy that yes, there is term limit in the constitution to say that any sitting president cannot go more than 2 terms of 5 years each. And for President Barrow, there has been a lot of rumors and speculations that this term may not be considered for him, and that, okay, he can sit up to 15 years. In fact, we interviewed a taxi driver sometime last week who prayed for him to do 20 instead of 15. Somebody interviewed him, and I was laughing. But you specifically stated that this term for President Barrow is part of his term. So generally, even after elections, Barrow cannot sit for more than 10 years. Another president will frown at you there.
I don't think, I won't call it targeting, to tell you very frankly, Pausman. This is a subject matter on which the public have expressed their opinion, but it's also one that we have researched, and we have two of Africa's finest, intellectuals on this subject matter that we've consulted, and the opinion was that we should consider it in terms of ensuring that what we are looking for is not so much about an individual or what an individual does. It's about what system do we establish to ensure peace and harmony in this country, to ensure the peaceful transition from one government to the next. What we have also done in this particular context is to look at the incumbency, because you cannot leave out the incumbency. That subject matter you have to do. It's a live issue. It's a real issue. What other countries have done was to be silent about it in their constitution. They say president cannot serve more than 2 terms, and they leave the whole issue about incumbency to legal interpretation or judicial interpretation. We decided not to go along that route because that's just muddying the waters. That's just a potential for crisis, it's a potential for instability, and so on and so forth. We thought that would be irresponsible on our part as professionals, charged with the responsibility of crafting a constitution that truly reflects the wishes and aspirations of the Gambian people. And, I can't speak to how the president is thinking. I would want to think that he's a true Democrat, and in all my interactions with him, I can't say anything to the contrary. And obviously, I like to deal with people in good faith, and I take them on their face value as well in terms of what they represent and what they say. It is important that this is not viewed as targeting anybody. This is just a case of dealing with a real situation where we want to make sure that we do not leave matters to judicial or legal interpretation that could result, that could have an unintended consequence. So it is important, in our view, that we made this abundantly clear, and our research, our review of opinion, and our consultations with our team of consultants have actually convinced us that this is the right thing to do, and that's why you have that provision in the Constitution.
Well, some people or a group of people suggest that though, if Barrow doesn't take anything out of this draft after you submit it, this is the one thing that he will take out. What's your take on that?
Well, I can't speak to the Pausman. Honestly, I mean, people have, people have the right to speculate. People will speculate anything, but I think it will be rather premature, in my view, to attribute anything to the president at this stage. That's a subject matter I think people should be patiently should be patient with. I think ultimately what is important is the recognition that there is this specific provision in the Constitution, is in the transitional provisions, and it's not a question of somebody taking it out because he or she doesn't like it. I'll tell you, I mean, if every Gambian is asked to look at the Constitution and point out 5 things that they don't want in the Constitution, everybody will come up with something. Everybody will come up with something. So I said before, women are marginalized. This is designed to ensure that we provide that platform where they come up and equally participate in national affairs. Similarly, with,
some people's argument, sorry for cutting you short there,
yeah.
some people's argument is, what if no woman is interested to actually participate? Why imposing it on the people?
Well, let's see.
No woman is interested.
Let's see what happens. All right, let's see what happens. I think if anything is true in this country, it is that women are more active in politics than men. That is the reality, you know. And for somebody to tell me that you could sit down and you know, election time have no woman, you know, volunteering to run for election. I think that is far too remote. It's something that I'm not convinced about, and I've yet to see anybody who could really be convinced about that. But I think it's the principle. It's not so much about the ifs and buts. It's more about ensuring that in our national discourse, all shades of and all categories of citizens are properly represented in the National Assembly. And we have done so for women, we have done so for people with disability, and for the youth we've also done that in the context that every political party is required to, you know, is required to ensure that at least 10% of its candidates are made up of youths. So I think it's important. We need to bring these important constituencies up to the desired level so that they can equally participate in national discussions and national debate, national development. I think that's something that we are confronted with. I haven't seen this really being a controversial issue. I mean, all along our public consultations, there have been strong opinion, even from amongst the main folk, that women, persons with disabilities, and the youth should be empowered.
Okay. Protection of the fundamental rights. These are God-given rights, but especially we've currently seen or heard the debate going on about that with the bill that was being leaked from the Attorney General's office. I mean, about the insulting and all of these other things that are happening. Some people say these are just things that are there in the Constitution, but they are barely protected, and the current administration is accused of course, infringing on the rights of the people, or trying to infringe on the rights of the people in every way, shape, or form, restricting folks who want to demonstrate. Of course, now people who want to speak their minds. I mean, this is just some opinions out there that I'm throwing at you based on the criticism that are being received, and of course that is being included in the draft. What can you tell us about the protection of these fundamental human rights? So people say, okay, these are just things that I just said. It's just lip service, but it is not practicalized. What can you tell us about this?
You know, like any law, any other law, if provision is made to protect community, protect individuals, there are avenues created by which you can enforce those. If we are given rights and we sit aside and allow those rights to be violated without contesting them, quite clearly, we probably are either not disturbed or we are just satisfied that our rights are being trampled upon, or it could be some other reason. Because if your right is being violated, the Constitution gives you the avenue to seek redress through judicial and other means. And it is important that people take cognizance of the fact that in the draft Constitution there is specific provision to challenge any violation of right. And this time we've even gone further, whereby we are allowing a person to act in the interest of somebody else. You know, be it whether you are part of a group or otherwise, you know, just to make sure that these fundamental rights are not only enforced but they are respected, you know, and people comply with the requirements that are enshrined in the Constitution. But the fundamental issue here, Pa, is that the Constitution is a mere document, if I can put it that way. We have to breathe life into that Constitution. And breathing life into that Constitution means being vigilant, being protective of it, and also ensuring that any violation of any single provision of the Constitution is actually taken up in the appropriate forum and challenged. I think that's the only way we can develop and build our democracy. It is not all about government or other matters. Even in government, things happen that certain key persons in government are not even aware of. But again, we perpetuate behaviors like that when we just decide to fold our hands. In the typical Gambian fashion, we believe in maslaha. And then we sit down in our quiet corners and complain and grumble. That doesn't help you. It doesn't help anybody. So if it does anything, it's just more violation and more grumbling and more complaining. That doesn't help. I think as a society, we need to grow. We need to not only be cognizant of the rights that are being protected, but also to ensure that those rights are being respected. And in exercising those rights and freedoms, we also act responsibly. Because every right, every freedom given to anybody has equal measure in relation to another person. So exercise that right, exercise that freedom, recognizing the fact that it's not supposed to trample on the rights and freedoms of somebody else. So this is a question of checks and balances, but ultimately I think we owe it to ourselves as a people, as a country, to not only help each other, but to protect the Constitution that governs us.
That is very important. I am glad you mentioned checks and balances and the separation of power. We see that quite a number of powers have been taken away from the National Assembly as well, because previously they were regarded as a rubber stamp National Assembly as to what they could and couldn't do, and even some entry clauses could have been manipulated somewhat. And you mentioned the law that was carried by and the like, and it is very important anyway. We don't have any more time. Two more questions. The one is very important. The some people is, how much money is the CRC worth or has spent so far or will be spending on this project? I have asked you this before. Jane Commission was criticized, TRRC is criticized, CRC is certainly criticized. People say they see Seni Marina now in suits, they see him driving a very good car thanks to the CRC. Seni is, all over the place and flying in and out of the country, Justice Diallo and everybody else on board. Like I said, Santa Yala, thanks to the CRC. So, yeah, this is the people's opinion, by the way. So, how much money is this CRC, or has the CRC spent, or will be spending by the
it sounds more like people's speculation than factual position. If you ask me, I think Seni Marina deserves even better. Because I've seen him at work and I've seen, the sort of services he's carrying out on behalf of his country. But the long and short of it is that at the end of this whole exercise, we will make it public in terms of the amount that has gone into this. And when we came back from the diaspora consultations, people were saying we would spend nearly $30 million on the external consultation alone. It did not even come half to that. Half of that. We spent about $13 million for the internal consultation, about $14 million for the external consultation. But the fact of the matter is, if we measure our progress, our development, by money, then I think we are taking a retrograde step here. I think what we should be concerned is whether the money being allocated, because this is not going to be done successfully, and it certainly could not have gotten us to where we are today if the necessary funding wasn't provided. Yes, people's concerns should be concentrated on whether the funds that have been provided have been misused. If they have been misused, then quite clearly everybody has to be concerned. I will be the first person to be concerned about that. But so I say this all to make the point that we at the CRC, I would want to think, have sacrificed enormously over and beyond money considerations. Up to the eve of the publication of the proposed draft constitution, we were in the office until well after 3 a.m. And nobody complaining, everybody carrying out their work as if we were in broad daylight. So I think, it's easy for people to sit back and criticize and not knowing what has been going, on the inside. And I think we need to be more measured. We need to be more measured.
Thank you very much, sir. I have been informed that our time is up. My final question to you is, do Gambians vote for this draft after it's submitted to the president in its entirety? Or, okay, man buguma for lele, you either vote yes for the constitution in its entirety, the draft, or you vote no for Lila Buga, I want this there, I don't want this there. How does that process work? Can you let us know? We have a lot of young people who actually did not vote in referendums. We hear about it, and just educate the masses on that process. And that is my last question to you.
A referendum is a yes or no situation. You either take the constitution with all its flaws and vote yes, or you reject it with all its goods and vote no. So that's essentially what it is. You can't cherry pick in terms of what you want to vote for or not. That will be one of the most complicated things to do if that were to happen. I don't know that has happened anywhere in this world. Yes.
If a no is voted, what happens? If it is voted no, majority votes no.
If the majority votes no, it's a policy decision as to what they want to do after that. I mean, remember, we would have been out of...
The 97 constitution remains.
Yeah, the 97 constitution remains until it is replaced. There's no doubt about that. But remember, once we finish this, we are out of the picture.
So if a yes is voted, okay. So once you submit it, you are out of it. The rest is left to the people.
The rest is left to the powers that be, namely the executive, the legislature, and if it goes to a referendum, the body responsible for conducting elections and referenda. You remember, we can't stay. We can't stay and continue with that process. Yes.
Yes. Thank you very much, Justice Jallo. It was time well spent with you again. I appreciate you honoring the invitation. Your final words to my viewers and listeners.
Well, thank you very much, Pausman. Thank you for once again affording the CRC this platform to have this dialogue with you. In the interest of our country and in the interest of our viewers and your viewers and listeners. For us, I think we have started a very constructive process to enhance our national development. We have seen and we have been extremely pleased with the level of Gambian participation in this process, and that's a process we want to see continue right to the end. What I will say as a final word is to encourage Gambians to look at the draft constitution, express their opinions on the subject matter. They can write to us and express those opinions, recommendations, and so on, or they can meet with us when we engage in this public consultation. Unfortunately, we won't be going out to the diaspora again, so there won't be any further debate as to how much we've spent on diaspora consultations. I think what is important ultimately is that we are giving everybody, every Gambian home and abroad, the opportunity to look at this document. It's on our website. Those who want hard copies can visit our office. Copies are available, and we make those available to them. But ultimately, I think I think it's the duty of every Gambian to participate in this process. Final word, Pausman, is to thank you and your colleagues in the media field. I think we all have done a lot of good service for your country. By not necessarily giving us this platform, but by informing Gambians of what is happening, by exchanging opinions on these matters. You've done wonders. You may not understand or appreciate the value of the success you have achieved today, but hopefully history will judge you in the most kind way and reward you abundantly. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That's Justice Dano Jallo QC, the chairman of the Gambia's Constitutional Review Commission. I truly appreciate the words of wisdom you've shared with us and clearing the air or talking to us about some of these concerns that the Gambian people have, especially since last week. Well, the thanks and appreciation goes to you and your entire team for definitely doing this for us. Every Gambian, I would often say Gambia is a crime scene. and we have a lot of things that we need to put in place, and having the good laws that would protect us is the first and most important step of our democracy or the new Gambia that we are calling for. And you being the one who facilitated that with your team, we cannot do but appreciate you and thank you. And we cannot thank you enough. Thank you for honoring this invitation. Thank you, Seni Maris, for putting it together. And thank you to everybody that is watching and listening to us. This was a special edition of the Nahobai Show brought to you by Taos Manju. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, Gambian Talents TV on YouTube. Like us on Instagram, Twitter, Snapchat, Gambian Talents Promotion, Benen Jamana, inshallah. Mange am Sheikh Omar Faye, Minister of Defense, on Tuesday, inshallah. Until then, I thank you all very much for watching and for listening. Stay tuned with our other programs. Thank you.